F you, you genocidal mother effer.
What really stayed with me is not the debate itself, but when it was announced that we lost, the response of the audience.
It was visible to all of us that they set this up deliberately.
That so many people, including young Jews, have really come to associate Israel, Zionism, the Star of David with the ultimate evil.
I'm not here to entertain you, because actually what we're talking about are two of the worst charges.
And remember, when the Jews won the debate, they were slaughtered. When the Jews lost the debate, they were slaughtered. That was pretty much the feel.
To slander us and the Jewish nation. And it was just such a hideous thing, all dressed up as a fun night out in your finest clothes.
The Jews suffer from a timing problem, meaning that by the time that the world wakes up to how dangerous this ideology is, we often suffer the brunt of the damage.
We didn't get the dress code, we should be wearing hijabs.
I'm Jonathan Sacerdoti.
Some of you maybe knew me before, and some of you maybe discovered me this last week or two, which has been a strange one for me because I did this debate at the Oxford Union that was a little bit traumatic. And it made me immediately think of a debate that I went to a few years ago in London when you were speaking alongside Melanie Phillips against Mehdi Hassan, and I don't remember who the other speaker was actually.
Pepe, Ilan, right?
Pepe, yes, that's right. It was. I remembered it was one of them.
Yeah, one of the sellout Jews, yes.
So I thought it would be a good place to start if we could talk about our experience of, as you said, support group for traumatic, hideous, anti-Semitic crowds in debates in the UK. So tell me about your version of that.
So first of all, thank you and well done. And really also when I saw you there at Oxford, and Natasha's here too. And Natasha actually warned me before the debate in 2019, was it? Of Mehdi. But, and indeed I'd have to say, the debate that I did in 2019, the motion was, it was hosted by Intelligence Squared. The motion was that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And, you know, I prepared for it. And I didn't care so much for the debate per se. I just wanted to make sure, in that sense, I got what I wanted, that I will have a video of me making that case, and it will stay there regardless of the outcome of the debate. But what really stayed with me is not the debate itself, but when it was announced that we lost, the response of the audience was such glee, and it had a kind of pre-pogrom Eve energy to it. I literally felt like in those medieval debates that we read about of the Jews that had to debate, typically the converted, the Jews who convert to Christianity. And remember, when the Jews won the debate, they were slaughtered. When the Jews lost the debate, they were slaughtered. That was pretty much the feel. And I felt that this was the kind of audience, I mean, you, Natasha, can say your feeling, but I felt that this was an audience that energized by the feeling that they are now legitimized. Their anti-Zionism has nothing to do with Jews. It's a respectable ideology. I felt that they could literally leave the hall and go and begin break front glass doors in London. And that was actually the debate that took me on the journey of realizing, and Lee mentioned it here too, that this is not a theoretical issue. It's not a kind of like, oh, so tariffs are good, no tariffs are bad, well done, thank you for your arguments. That's when I came back from that debate truly rattled and realizing that this is not a theoretical issue, it's an urgent, practical matter. So now you tell your experience.
I felt that they had that glee the moment we walked in. And maybe that's the few years difference, I don't know. What happened in the Oxford Union debate was there were a couple of cast changes during the lead up to it. And in the end, the Oxford Union, I think, had set this whole thing up. It was visible to all of us that they'd set this up deliberately to be an opportunity to, as you said, prove to the world Israel is both an apartheid state and genocidal in action. And as if a bunch of kids in black ties saying so made it authoritative for the whole world. But that is what the implication was. And, it does have a reputation, that place. So I think the idea that they could achieve that vote would allow them to then go to town on it around the world. And I think that their efforts to sabotage us from the word go were totally out of keeping with the spirit of fair debate and discussion and intellectual discourse, which is what it's supposed to be, all in a format which is meant to be sort of entertaining. So everything about it was wrong, and I did say at the beginning of the speech that everything about it was wrong. And also, I felt it very important to open by saying, I'm not here to entertain you, because actually what we're talking about are two of the worst charges in the world that you can make against people or a nation, and a room that was stacked against us, with a chairman that was stacked against us, who had invited the worst people he could on the other side to slander us and the Jewish nation. And it was just such a hideous thing, all dressed up as a fun night out in your finest clothes. So I think that I knew what I was going into, but interestingly, long story short, we managed to match their two Jews on the anti-Israel side. They had booked Miko Peled and Norman Finkelstein. So I think they felt very clever about that, but we managed to fix our team once a couple of people did pull out with two Arabs. Now, I will say this, we didn't choose them as tokens, actually. They were two outstanding people to make this case, not just because they're brilliant speakers, Yosef Haddad and Mossab Hassan Yosef, but because their existence disproved the motion. Yosef Haddad, for those who don't know him, is living proof.
You could have just gone in, said this disproves the motion, and go away.
That was kind of what I hoped would happen. Like, how could anyone look at this man who is an Israeli Arab, who has achieved everything he's achieved, and talk so frequently about this, and then say it's an apartheid state? And similarly, how often can you bring to a debate about such grand things as terrorism and Hamas and Israel, a guy who was the son of a founder of Hamas, who was a Hamas terrorist, who became an agent for Israel, informing on Hamas to save hundreds or thousands of lives from suicide bombings? I felt, even if they stack the room with people who hate us, they're going to see this and they're going to understand that they're wrong. But I won't claim I was that naive, but that was what I hoped. But actually, the reality was quite hideous, and the mood in the room for us was horrible. And I remember sitting in the audience for your debate, and I went with my mum, and I said to her, I think we didn't get the dress code. We should be wearing hijabs, because it didn't actually look like a standard. On BBC Question Time, they always invite a typical audience. They weight it by who voted for what and what have you. It didn't happen in IQ Squared. Yep. That audience were not a cross-section of the nation, and it felt very intimidating to us as an audience. I don't know how it felt to you.
Oh, yeah. As I said, there was Melanie basically, as soon again as they just erupted in glee, Melanie was like, and now you know why I live in Israel. And I was also like, I was really rattled for a very long time. But I want to say something about Yosef and Mossa being in the debate, because I think as we look into the future, that's going to end up being the most significant element in the debate. For me, absolutely, since October 7th, the biggest ray of light has been Arab, Muslim, ex-Muslim voices who have been speaking up for Israel. And they have clearly been some of the most effective speakers, because they know what the conflict is really about. They can talk to an Arab and Muslim identity that is not obsessively anti-Zionist. Like you said, in their very existence, they often disprove some of the claims. And they're often the ones who are best placed to say to their so-called white saviors, leave us alone. We don't need, you're essentially using us. which is true. So I think the debate you participated in, on the one hand, had all the elements of what has been building up for decades, this thing that I've called the Placard strategy, the equating of Israel and Zionism with all the evil. I was surprised that they managed to put apartheid and genocide in the motion, right? They were like, can we get any more words in there? Yeah, any more words in there? The fact that it was in the Oxford Union, the strategy is always built on respectability, laundering it through international institutions, through academia, through bodies like the Oxford Union, and each one of them is part of how these ideas are given the respectability of being serious. So on the one hand, the debate had all the elements of a strategy that has been building up for decades, but I think, thanks to your team, it also has the elements of a potentially different future.
I hope that's right. And actually, you know, the other elements, or the other element, secret weapon of our team was Natasha, because, you know, Natasha has become perhaps the most recognized commentator in the media on international law relating to Israel at the very least, and if not more broadly. And to have, I felt, the team that we did against the president of the union's wishes, we really had, often you get in these sorts of debates, they're quite performative, you get four people saying the same thing, but we didn't. We had four people saying very different things about the same topic. And so again, they chose these two words, this double whammy, and you're right, the groundwork has been laid for that for many, many years, decades. And October the 7th provided the perfect storm, I think, internationally for the activation of this. You know, it was the catalyst to the science experiment. They put all the pieces in place, and many people had just let it happen because they said, oh, it doesn't matter. Israel Apartheid Week doesn't matter. Of course, it's a stupid word. But then in that moment, everyone was primed for it. And again, that's why in my speech, I decided, similar to you, I will go there and try to debate it, but I don't expect to win, certainly. I felt that what I said to them was, this is an appeal to your prejudice. It's not an appeal to your intellect. And I hoped that a room of Oxford students, whatever their background, maybe naively, you know, I was once one of them. I hoped that having someone come in and say, I know you don't agree with me, you don't agree with us, but we're going to give you four very different versions of why we think this, and at least give us the respect of hearing it. And then maybe you will challenge your ideas, and maybe you'll still agree with what you thought, or maybe you'll come away a little bit altered, or maybe you'll still hate us. But that wasn't, you know, I mean, what made all this so prominent in the media was that, you know, within, I think it was 8 minutes, I've now learnt, I wasn't quite aware of the time then, this woman stood up and screeched at me, F you genocidal mother effer, and didn't stop, top of her lungs. And this was after a lot of coughing and giggling.
This is allowed?
Arabic.
By the way, like all this?
No, it's not allowed,
Okay.
but it is allowed if the chairman is, let's say, asleep on the job or maybe planned it. And that was, to me, that was deeply shocking because it wasn't the whole point of this place. I thought at least we would play the game that we were debating this. But I actually saw an article somebody wrote about this in commentary yesterday, and it had sort of passed me by, even though it was my speech. The thing that triggered that response, that visceral hatred, was actually not an opinion, it was a fact. I read out the factual account of how many calories of aid have gone into Gaza, and then the average that was per day, and then I compared it to the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK's average required for men in the UK. And it was higher than that. And I said that people in Gaza, that more food was going in to the people of Gaza than the world average per day, which is a fact. So all of these were facts. And actually, what was the most offensive thing to these people? Facts. Because it utterly jarred with what they felt or thought or had as a prejudice. And that, to me, was the biggest disappointment. And I felt, by the way, I felt the same. Maybe we should move on from the support group bit of this in a moment. But I felt the same in your debate. And I will say this, and it's not just flattery. I thought your speech, because you went in there, you and Melanie, with that attitude, we're here to state our case and have it on the record. Your speech was amazing. You know, I pointed many people to that speech online since, because it was an important case. And so I do think that a lot of people said, why did you go? I imagine you had that too. And the answer is because if you give up making your case publicly, especially to people who hate you, you can't possibly expect to change anything, I think. I don't know if you agree with that.
I think it's important, especially as time passes. So when I debated the motion of anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism, it was still a kind of issue for people who are interested. And the claims that I made, I think the fact that it was online, it was on record, unfortunately stood the test of time. So the debate is never the debate itself. You're part of an ongoing debate. So it's not just in the room with those people. So if you make the case, it's part of a much bigger debate over time, and that actually has value. Can I ask you about, I didn't have the patience to listen to the other side, if I may. Was there anything that struck you that...
Yeah, there was a lot that struck me. I mean, a short version of it. Mohammed Al-Kurd was their first speaker.
Oh my, okay.
Mohammed Al-Kurd, for those who don't know, is famous for, I think became famous around the land dispute in Sheikh Jarrah.
Yes, he and his sister,
right,
yeah.
And he and his sister became massive influencers online because they were young Palestinians and they struck this chord with the sort of social media world. He came and he had previously actually just in January been in the UK and I may be paraphrasing, but I don't think I am. I think he gave a speech in which he said that we should normalize massacres as the status quo. And the police were alerted to it. It was at a public rally about Israel, of course, after October the 7th. And they decided not to act, as far as I'm aware.
I think his claim, by the way, was that he let the word no slip. That's at least his claim.
Right.
So maybe that's what he said to the police.
So, yeah. Well, it's like, remember, it's the same British police who, when there was film of people calling for jihad in the streets of London, said jihad can mean different things.
That's true.
Which it can, of course. But I think when people are calling for it in a protest after the biggest massacre of Jews since October the 7th, in that context, maybe we have a clue what it means.
Exactly.
So he was there, he gave a speech in which he said this is undebatable because it's indisputable, and then said he refused to be in the room with the rest of us and left at the end of his speech.
Really?
Yeah. And that was the opening of the whole thing. The second speaker was, extraordinarily enough, not Norman Finkelstein, because when he heard that we did have Mossab there, he quit.
Oh yeah, I remember when he did the whole thing about... Okay,
and he went on Piers Morgan's show the day before, actually, with my friend Fleur Hassan Nahum, and she actually was in London for that, so I saw her the day before. And she told me that she asked him, why won't you debate Mossab? And he said, I won't debate psychopaths, though I made an exception for you. So he also was not keen on the debate, especially not with an Arab who was born into a Hamas family. So he was replaced, extraordinarily, by the president of the Oxford Union, who was meant to be chairing the debate.
Really?
And he announced to us on the day, once we were there, by the way, I will be speaking against you. So he stepped down from his throne upon high, where he sits as the chair, keeping order, and
it just gets better.
Went to give a speech against us, in which he attacked particularly the Arab members of our team.
Wow.
So again, not quite the convention. He assured us it was very normal. And then there was Miko Peled, who is a well-known anti-Israel activist, who in his speech, and there is a recording of it online that I did with my phone, even though the union has held back his speech from publication, he said that the October the 7th was not terrorism, it was an act of heroism. Now, the thing is, I'm all for disagreeing with people politely and how we interpret things, but I think it's really hard to imagine what kind of person thinks it's heroic to have that happen. And, maybe Miko Peled doesn't know what happened, but I think probably he does. And, certainly many of the rest of us have gone and met the people who experienced it. Just a couple of days ago, met a woman who was one of the hostages and was released. She spent her time, she told me, in being a hostage, actually making small talk with the two guys who were guarding over her, discussing their daily lives because they wanted to understand each other. One of them was a lawyer, she said the other one was a teacher. She was in Khan Yunis. She was one of the lucky ones, of course. She wasn't in a tunnel. She says they treated her relatively well in that period. She knows they weren't all treated that well. But how could somebody call the people that did that and incidentally killed her husband heroic? It's unthinkable that he could do that. And then the last speaker was a lady who is a Palestinian writer, a novelist, I think. And she refused to take any points of information. It's part of the convention that you can offer interjections and the speaker can take them or not. She told us at the beginning, I won't take any. And she read out her speech in which she made allegations that Israeli troops poisoned tins of food and left them for Palestinians and left booby-trapped teddies. And there were a lot of things she said in her speech. It was, very poetically written. She is a writer. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't a discussion, it wasn't an interaction of minds, and like you, I felt it was important that we did go there and that we made our case and that we put it on record. And as you say, I think it's a really good point. It exists not just in that moment, it exists in the wider discourse that's going on. And I don't mean it just as a historical record, because I don't want to be a historical record in the story of the downfall of the Jews. It's not the point. The point is that maybe it will live on. And incidentally, I'm staggered that 1 million people have now watched my speech online, which is the most number of people that have ever... well, I'm also not used to applause for that speech, so thank you. But that's in like 2 weeks. And so I don't say that to congratulate myself, but I say it because that was the point. I wanted 1 million people to hear that speech, not 400 people who hated me already. And I think that's exactly the point. So let's move on from the trauma of the UK, or rather move away from the debates. What I thought we could talk about is a bit about how typical that is outside. We called this evening Israel versus the world. It feels like that to me at times. And it's weird when I come here because I feel very energized by coming to Israel since October the 7th. And a lot of people back home don't understand that, but I explain to them that it's a country that's got a unique sort of reunited vision, I feel. And yes, there's plenty of disagreement, but people really kind of understand. Nothing focuses the mind, I'm afraid, like a war. It seems to have rotted the mind back home. And Israelis say to me when I come here, how are you? How are you coping? And I find that very strange. But on the other hand, I don't find it very strange because I told a story to a friend last night that I went for a haircut at the Turkish barbers that I usually go to. And I mentioned that I was going away and he said, where to? And I said, Italy. And I felt really sad that I'd done that because I have a rule that I don't lie about anything to do with being Jewish or Israel. And she said to me, "Why? Oh, it's so sad that you felt you weren't safe." I said, "No, I felt I'd get a bad haircut."
Yeah, they're with the scissors. That's like
that was. I was just worried. There's not a lot left to play with, and so. But seriously. How do you're based here, but you travel a lot around the world, how do you see it as an Israeli when you leave Israel? Do you feel the same as I do? That actually, at least this country, yes, the worst thing possible happened here. And that surprised me. Yeah, never again, we said, and I expected it to happen again where I live, but it didn't. It happened right here. And on the other hand, I feel like at least Israel kind of pulled itself together at that moment and has been very focused, right?
First of all, yes. I think people created now a modified never again. Now it's like, never again will we not respond. So now it's like, okay, so we're still good. But I oscillate since October 7th between moments of being completely overwhelmed just by the scale of those who are arrayed against us, despite what I said about, again, wonderful voices who are Arabs and Muslims and ex-Muslims. The vast majority of the Arab and Muslim world is very much obsessed with what Abba Eban called policide, so the non-existence of a sovereign polity for the Jewish people. to see how deep and broad the Placard strategy has penetrated, that so many people, including young Jews, have really come to associate Israel, Zionism, the Star of David with the ultimate evil. I've been talking a lot about this post-October 7th placard that appeared that said, "Keep the world clean," with the Star of David in a trash bin, because that is essentially the most ancient and most dangerous idea when it comes to Jews in general, but we know it from our history, that what stands between utopia, a clean world, and this messy world is the collective Jew, that therefore has to be placed in a trash bin by any means necessary. That's also been a major term after October 7th. So sometimes I have moments of being completely overwhelmed and wondering, what chance do we have? Like, literally, what chance do we have? When those are the numbers, billions. And sometimes I see that we have friends, good friends, that will have none of this. And this is the vision that these days I try to bring to people. I tell them, look, the Jews suffer from a timing problem, meaning that by the time that the world wakes up to how dangerous this ideology is, we often suffer the brunt of the damage. So we need to focus as Jews on minimizing the damage to our people until the world wakes up. But ultimately, the tide will only turn when a plurality of non-Jews in America, Canada, France, and Britain, which are the four main arenas outside of Israel, will essentially stand up and say, not here. Not in Canada, not in America, not in France, not in Britain. So sometimes I have moments where I'm saying, where are they? And sometimes I have moments where I see them and I'm like, we have good friends and we have allies, and whatever you think about the American president, I can say in the name of quite a few Israelis, there was a sigh of relief here. Just a sense that at least, especially we saw it, even just the tweet on the hostages, after so many wasted months of negotiations and pressuring Israel, finally the attitude of like, they'll be hell to pay. Just release them. And they'll be hell to pay. And finally and that's the attitude, right?
I think I wrote on Twitter, how come no one said that 14 months ago?
Exactly.
Like, why, you can mock the guy as much as you like, but at the end of the day, it was the simplest message.
Exactly.
You don't take children, old people, civilians, mothers, fathers, even soldiers, you don't do it. It's not what human beings are meant to do.
And then the expectations that Israel will negotiate. Canada has a great government waiting in the wings, so the sooner Trudeau can go and Pierre can go up, I see, yes. We'll see what happens with France. I don't know.
We're the odd one out, I think. That's the problem.
No, isn't Kemi good? She's not...
Yeah, but we're 5 years away at least, minimum.
Nothing...
we just switched the wrong way in terms of Israel, and that is distinctly worrying. And actually, there's another phenomenon that's going on in the UK, which is interesting, because the last trip I was here a few months ago was just after our election, and I remember mentioning in a podcast something which a lot of people didn't spot, which is, a lot of people noticed we had, I think it's 5 Reform MPs, this new kind of right-wing branch off. That was noted a lot, but what was under-noted was that we also had a few independent MPs who effectively stood against Labour Party candidates on a ticket that over one word, Gaza.
Yeah. Which
is weird, because Gaza is not actually a political issue in the UK. It has literally no influence on Gaza. But of course, it was a dog whistle word. It didn't mean anything to do with Gaza. It was promoted by a website which called itself the Muslim Vote. And those MPs, I think it's 4 or 5 of them, plus the previous Labour MP, Jeremy Corbyn, who is now an independent, they've all united in Parliament. And there's actually, I read just as a sort of caucus, and they are now thinking, this is the thing that's changed since I was here last talking about it, there are rumours of them starting a party. And that will be, I think, the UK's first political Islamic party. Now that's a notable moment, at the very least, to say that I don't think there is a Jewish political party. I don't even think we've got particularly a Christian political party. So for us to be...
It's not just going to be an Islamic political party. That would have been okay.
It's probably going to be the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the point.
It's going to be an anti-Jewish political party.
And I think that's really alarming. So not only did we get a government which now will arrest Bibi Netanyahu if he comes to the UK, and which removed Britain's objection to the ICC request for arrests that the previous government was putting in place, all of these things that put in place a partial embargo on arms to Israel, all of those things this new government has done. Unfortunately, we are completely out of sync with the other changes you mentioned. The good news is, I think, and it gives me little pride to say it as a Brit, it doesn't really matter what Keir Starmer and the government think. When Donald Trump is back in charge, I don't think he will have a lot of freedom to influence things here. And that is, I suppose, a relief. But I must say, and we were chatting before, I'm really pessimistic, and I hate saying that, especially in public places, because lots of times people look to you to give an optimistic message, and I'm not really able to very often. I try, and I do think that there's a majority. We talk about the silent majority. I don't think we ever know if it's a majority. There are a lot of people who agree with us, but I think they feel a bit lost politically and socially. They're afraid to talk about what they feel is the real issue, and I'm going to bring it up now and see what you think. The real issue is to do with Islam, and I think that that's something, I still find it really hard to say it out loud in contexts like this, but since October the 7th, particularly, I felt I have to, because another thing, I've said many times, and I said it in that speech in the Oxford Union, I watched all the videos I could find from the moment I heard about the atrocities unfolding. I decided I have to watch them all. Well, I felt like, it's like the Holocaust. You need to see what happened. Instantly, I knew it. So I found them. They're really easy to find. You go on Telegram and you just find them all live. And some of them then made their way eventually, a year later, the BBC put on Yariv Moses' really good documentary about the Nova Festival. And he used some of these clips that had not been broadcast on British TV before. And there's this one really important one where it's the GoPros from Hamas, and they shout, even if 1,000 die, even if 2,000 die, this is we're fighting for the nation of jihad. And they didn't shout, we want a two-state solution, living in peace and harmony, coexisting with our Jewish brothers and sisters, or that bit of land is ours, but we'd like you to have the other bit. They shouted that they wanted to die themselves in their thousands for jihad. So I've got to the point where I think we have to just say it. We have to have the conversation. We have to say, if there is an ideology that believes we should be dead for being Jewish, or any other number of reasons, why is it unfashionable, rude, racist for us to outwardly express our disagreement, disgust, disapproval, even hatred of that? I don't want to have to think about Islam, but where it interferes in my life, where it interferes in Israel's existence, don't we have to?
So here I have a somewhat different attitude to that, because it forms part of my attitude in general of cultures and religions and systems of thought. And that they are all ultimately systems of human interpretation. If you look at all religious texts, they tend to be quite opaque. And ultimately, all religions are systems of interpretation that pretend as if the texts are clear and they point you in a clear direction, which they don't. When I taught this course, and it's available on YouTube, on Zionism and anti-Zionism, I showed how you could have religious Jewish interpretations that would support Zionism, and you'd have religious Jewish interpretations that would support anti-Zionism, at least the secular one. That you could have Christian interpretations that would be against Zionism because Jews theologically need to be weak, dispossessed, and miserable in order to prove the truth of Christianity. And you could have Christian restorationist ideas. So when you say Islam, I'm under no illusion that at this moment, much or many of the interpretations of Islam are geared, at least from the part that I care about, against the idea of a sovereign Jewish state. The only part that I don't accept is that this is therefore immutable, that this can never change. Because there are Muslims and there are Arabs, and I'm in touch with them, and they claim, not in the name of being ex-Muslims, there's also those, but in the name of Islam and their Arab identity, the right of the Jewish people to self-determination.
But you know, that's what triggered, that is what triggered October the 7th, is those Arabs and Arab states that wanted to show that you could have a Middle East with a thriving Jewish state in it. My problem is that it doesn't matter how many of them there are, if there's enough who aren't subscribing to that, I can't bet my future, my life, all of our lives on the idea that I know lots of Muslims like you who agree with what you said, but they may not win. And if they don't win, we don't win, and that's a problem. And the Quran has a lot of really bad stuff to say about us. But I think, if it's okay with you, we should open this up because
yes, I'd like that.
The smartest people in the room are maybe waiting to ask questions.
Firstly, guys, thank you so much for coming and speaking. Fantastic. I wonder, how often do you find yourselves trying to remind yourselves that actually the things that we see on social media and the speeches that we see are often those who are most vociferous about this issue? And actually, there's so many people, there's millions of people in Britain, for example, who are there that we can speak to who aren't already lost. And that we have to speak to them and that we have to focus on them rather than focusing on those who are the most vociferous about this issue. And I often find myself trying to remember that there's a huge proportion of the British population, for example, that we can have a reasonable conversation with, and that sometimes we forget them and we focus on the most extremes.
So I'll just say, sometimes I think the best strategy is just to let them play it out. I'm putting the Jews aside for a minute, because they make themselves so distasteful. I mean, when they were desecrating monuments during Armistice Day, I was thinking, okay, this is certainly not endearing them to a large share of the British public. And I'm sure that the Oxford Union debate also did not endear many of them, especially what you're describing, just simple bad manners. I'm sure a lot of British did not appreciate just someone saying, I refuse to be in this room, or people screeching or screaming, or not having a sense of the rules. So if I weren't concerned for the Jewish people, I would just say, let them play it out, because they make the best argument for us. They make themselves, the way they conduct themselves in the streets, the demonstrations, I doubt that it endears them to many British people. But as I said, the Jews have a timing problem. So until this plays out and the Canadians, the Americans, the Brits, and the French rise up to say, not here, we suffer the brunt of the damage. So a lot of my concern is, how do we manage the interim so that the damage is minimized as much as possible? At the end of the day, they're not endearing themselves to anyone.
I think I would add a little warning to that, though, because I think that in a way, that's what we did for a long time. And then we kind of let a lot of it go. And then on October the 7th, we were surprised, or some people were surprised, that it was easy to call us genocidal, or to call it apartheid, and it wasn't surprising, because actually we'd let it go all that time. We'd let people, we'd said, they're crazies, they're not endearing themselves to anyone, and I thought that too at times, but they were. If you say something enough times, and the people who aren't that interested just hear it enough times, when it comes round to it, people do believe it, and I think that you're right that there are some noisy, obnoxious people. So one of the things that resonated with people about the Oxford Union debate, I think, and it's not a guess, because people I've never heard of are writing to me to tell me that it was disgusting how we were treated, it's all wrong, they weren't debating, they weren't listening. None of those things are about Israel or Jews. They're about exactly what you've said, that's not cricket. And it isn't. So for me, that was good, because I thought they've noticed which side was doing that. If anyone on our side got a little heated, which was understandable in the circumstances, I don't think anyone could watch the full array of speeches and be in any doubt which side was badly behaved. At least I don't see any comparison. So I do think that there is, by association, some thinking then that people say, well, if they're always the ones that are throwing paint on things, or they're always the ones that are, screaming blue murder, maybe they're not very rational. But I don't think we can rely on that, because I think that at the end of it all, it's some of the people who are saying the worst slanders about us work in the BBC, for example. And they say it every night on the news, and they talk rubbish sometimes. I mean, there's that clip going around at the moment of Liz Doucette suggesting that there are Jews living in Syria.
Happily.
Right. Jeremy Bowen, another of their veteran correspondents, instantly blamed the supposed bombing of the Al-Ahli hospital on Israel. It wasn't bombed. The car park had a pothole in it from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad misfired rocket, but he said instantly that Israel did it. These aren't actually outliers. They are the people at the top. Liz Doucette and Jeremy Bowen are at the top of the BBC, our national broadcaster, which isn't just our national broadcaster, it's the world's most trusted English language news source. So I don't know how they came to be saying those things. Maybe it's because we did encounter it enough when other people did. Maybe they believe it. Either way, they're both wrong. It's not a matter of my opinion. It's not an opinion who bombed that hospital car park. It's a fact. It was a fact that many of us could see from the beginning. Like, it didn't look like an Israeli strike. So that's why I'm pessimistic, because I feel like we let it go, and I don't think anyone should go unchallenged. That's why I think they scream. We should calmly tell them why they're wrong, and hope that even if they don't hear it, the people around them hear it. That's what I think.
I think we might be missing something, and I'll give a little example just for a second. We all in Israel know that Assad is evil, and we also knew that he was used chemical weapons against his own people, and he was slaughtering, and I saw him on television, and he denied that, and I was like sniggering. And then I realized it's the same about Israel. Maybe, I don't know about Assad, I don't know about Assad, but maybe all those people that we think they're evil, they don't know, they can't tell between good or bad. They might not be evil, they are fed for so many years with lies about Israel being evil. So when they heard your facts, they don't snigger because they reject facts. They just sure that you're lying.
Yeah, but that's what she said. She said you're a liar. I mean, at the end of the day, I would even be willing to have a debate with her about whether the COGAT figures are accurate or not. Like, if she can explain to me why she thinks COGAT figures aren't accurate, or it's the same with the death counts, right? So there was so much debate about this. There still is. They still use these, 40,000, etc. But there's no real honest. BBC have this thing called BBC Verify. Sorry to make it all about the BBC, but it's a pretty big problem. BBC Verify was set up as their program to verify things like that, where we're not sure. Like, they said, how do we find out? But they did a BBC Verify, I think, on some of the Israeli statistics, and they never did one on the 40,000 claim, the Hamas Health Ministry claims, which plenty of analyses by statisticians have shown are inconsistent internally. They can't be right, because if more women and children added up died than the total number of people, or something along those lines, and it's obvious that there's a mistake, at least, if not a deception. So I think that there is a degree of credulity about this. You're right. Some people want to believe it. And she wanted to believe I was wrong. But even that, there's just an intellectual flabbiness in not being able to have the conversation. I think you're lying because. But she has no because. All she...
That's the moment where I just realized, for myself, I realized something. I assumed that there are evil people. And now I realize, now I'm taking, considering more ignorance than evil.
It's interesting.
I hope you don't mind. I apologise in advance, but can I just say something a little bit optimistic? Is that right? Don't upset anyone. I'm really excited that we're going to win and it's going to be amazing and brilliant and everyone's going to have incredible, happy lives. And it hasn't been fun, but it's been like a year and 3 months now, and they have thrown everything at us from so many different angles. They've thrown the biggest punches they've got in their arms and powers, and we've soaked it up and we've taken it. They've given the biggest plays they can, and it's a year and 3 quarters and we're still here, strong, in a great position with great opportunity. So we've taken some of the best they can throw, and we can give it back. Do you know what I mean? So it's So, do you know what I mean? They've given some of the best, and they're tired as well now, you know? So that's what I wanted to say. And then, just quick thing, John Simpson also, what he said about Assad, did you see that? He's the World Affairs editor at the BBC, and he said that Assad, he was weak rather than evil, laundering. So it's a real sickness. Anyway, so my question for both of you, and I'd love to hear your advice, let's forget about trying to get the non-Jewish world to stand by us because it's the right thing to do for us, or moral, or solidarity. What would you say to non-Jews in Britain and America of why they should support Israel for purely selfish reasons for them?
So I look at it this way. I've studied not the supporters of Israel, but I've looked at the supporters of what I've come to call Palestinianism, the ideology which is obsessed with the destruction of the Jewish state. And what the Arabs discovered fairly early is that in waging a total war against Jewish self-determination, they discovered that they struck a different kind of oil. They could rely on the support of every anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist power for the last century. So initially it was the Nazis in the 30s and 40s, and then it was the Pan-Arabists, and then it was the Soviets, and now it's the mullahs and ayatollahs of Iran. And I say that if you look at it, essentially supporters of Palestinianism end up defeated in a Cold War, in a hot war, but in the dustbin of history. And therefore, I've been saying for a while now, I can say with a fairly high level of confidence that the Ayatollah and Mullah regime will find itself in the same dustbin of history as its predecessor supporters of Palestinianism. And I'm not making a theological argument here, it's a social argument. Essentially, anti-Zionism is, to use the colorful language of the incoming president, the ideology of losers. It's the ideology of, of failed societies that look for scapegoats, that never serve their citizens, that are trying to kind of direct away from their failures. So as a result, they ultimately collapse onto themselves. And like I said, my concern is how much damage they do to the Jews on the way to the dustbin of history. But they do end up there. So my message to non-Jews is why would you want to follow this path? Like by now it's been a well-worn, treaded path, and I would think that by now you would figure out that this is not the team you want to support.
So that would be if you're speaking to the activists against Israel, but for those who aren't...
No, for the just normal non-Jews, I would tell them, why would you want your country to allow this ideology? If you're French, you're British, you're Canadian or American, why would you want this ideology to infect your country? It's never been good for anyone.
Well, listen, I agree with all of that, and I also thank you for your contribution on that, because you're right. That's why I do say I feel energized coming here, because you're right. This country has done an enormous amount, not just for itself, but for the world. What just happened in Syria, for example, you know, the BBC can say what they like about Assad being a nice chap, really, but the rest of the world knows that what happened when Israel took out basically the entirety, more or less, of Syria's army, air force, navy, well, the world was done a huge favor. The way we know that is because Britain and America and France tried a bit. You know, the Syrian research center that was the chemical weapons factory and storage, Israel took it out. Boom. We didn't manage that in 2018, partly because Assad was still in power and whatever, and Russia was still behind it, but Israel did us a huge favor, as it has done many times in history, the nuclear program, etc., as another example. I am optimistic about all of that, but the second part of your question is what makes me pessimistic, because despite all that, I live somewhere still where bizarrely people are attached to the losers or the destructive side or the you know, if all I despair when I see Palestinianism, and I heard, you know, I don't know if you made up the phrase, it's brilliant, and I think you did. So yeah, because what it does for me, and I talked about it with Mossab actually, it's let's stop saying Palestinians, because he said the Palestinians, I said to him, what do you mean by Palestinians? He says Palestinians is a mental illness. That's what he said. Okay, it's very inflammatory to people, and in the debate it drove them mad. They tried to kick him out when he said Palestinians are the most pathetic people in the world. These were the two statements he said. But he is, by their definition, a Palestinian. He's born to a founder of Hamas. He rejected it, and he rejects it all. So Palestinianism, I think, is a very smart way of looking at it, because what it does, it turns it into something like communism, Marxism, fascism, Nazism. It is a political ideology, and then that does unite all the people. It unites the people who are, let's say they left their homes upon the foundation of the state in the Nakba, or their descendants who may or may not be legitimate refugees, or white kids at university who like to wear a keffiyeh and shout "Free, Free Palestine." It unites all of them because it's an ideology. And those people I'm really worried about, because I just met 300 of them in the finest university in the country / world at one point, who that Oxford Union may look like a joke to some, but 20-something prime ministers of our country have gone through there. The current president and everything is you know, pursuing this goal. So I don't know how we appeal to them. Only what I keep saying is they're coming for you too. Not next. They're coming for you now. Like, it's the same ideology that blew up Manchester Arena. It's the same ideology now. It's the 20th anniversary film on the BBC of the 7/7 tube bombings, London's first suicide bombing. I'm not sure what it takes to wake people up. I don't know, because so far the things that woke me up didn't. Apparently, everyone else is still asleep, and I'm quite a sound sleeper. So anyway, I think probably we should take one or two more, and then
I just wanted to say you were looking for Americans who are not Jewish. I'm a Catholic American here from America. I do stand with you. But I gotta say, Israel's losing the information war, and I'm a reporter, and it's not made easy by, when I want to tell the truth, I have to have access to show people the truth. I can take you at your word, I take you at your word, but I've got a jillion people back home who have to believe with their eyes. So, as journalists, as speakers, as advocates, what can we do in the media to help show them the truths and the right of Israel to exist in general? And what could Israel and the IDF do to help beat against this Hamas, like, crazy information warfare that is taken the West? And it's really frustrating to see, especially as somebody who grew up with 9/11, and this was your 9/11. And I don't understand where that really came from. And anyway, just if you could comment on that.
So I'm not a journalist, and I have no way to kind of talk about the more day-to-day on how to be effective on that. I do have one thing. I've invented a word, another one, called West-plaining. West-plaining is when Western diplomats and journalists explain away what our enemies inconveniently say. So like you said, they go and they say, we don't want two states, we want all of it. And people will be like, they're being angry. My favorite example was quite a few years ago, in the kind of pre-run-up to October 7th, a few years ago, there were these marches of return, right, to Israel, not to Egypt. So a journalist came and did a video piece interviewing them, and he asked, what are you marching for? And they all gave the same answer. This is ours, we will take it back from the river to the sea. A 15-year-old said, I'm from village so-and-so. He's not from village so-and-so, he's 15. But they all say the same thing. And then the journalist turns around and says, they're fighting against the dire conditions in Gaza. And I'm thinking, it's literally the one thing they didn't mention. They called the marches of return, not the marches for more electricity. They were very clear. So for me, often the issue is not about showing new things. It's about actually giving our enemies the respect of taking them at their word and just reporting that this is what they're saying and and just not giving excuses or explanations, saying this is their ideology, they're infatuated with the destruction of the Jewish state. At every turn, at every moment, every time they had a choice, that's what they chose, and they tell you that. And for me, that's the only thing we really need to show. They say it all the time, just there's this tendency to constantly explain for them.
What about us that stand with Israel, though, and know the truth, and like are doing that?
Yeah.
Just keep talking about it?
And interview them, and if you can tell your audience, listen to them. Give them the respect of taking them at their word. They're not angry, they're not fighting against an oppressor, they're making a conscious, deliberate, ongoing choice to prioritize the destruction of the Jewish state over building anything for themselves. It's a consistent choice.
I actually have come around to thinking, I get why they didn't let journalists into Gaza, and I now get it because it's one of these examples of where Israel's options are between something really bad and something really, really bad. There wasn't a good option. And what they chose was really bad. It's that they'll get criticized, you're hiding something you don't want us to see. But the really, really bad version was where they let journalists into Gaza. And like letting in aid trucks to Gaza, which of course they should do, but those aid trucks ended up carrying in weapons and all the things that they could no longer get through the tunnels from Egypt, so they got hidden in aid trucks. The aid went in and it ended up subsidizing Hamas's war effort, because Hamas stole the aid and then sold it back to the starving people in order to carry on generating money that they could no longer generate through their old methods. They would do exactly the same thing with journalists, with us. We would go in there, and just from not being in there, Jeremy Bowen sang the Hamas hymn when he said Israel flattened the Al-Ahli hospital. The Al-Ahli hospital wasn't flattened by anyone. The car park had a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket in it. So imagine how bad it would be. So you might say, well, let him in and let him see. But no, the answer is you let them in, and what will happen is their Hamas stringer, their interpreters, all of these things will absolutely hijack the best of intentions that journalists have, all of us, even the best of us, will be utterly used. And if it doesn't work by fooling us, they will blackmail us. And if it doesn't work by blackmailing us, they will kill us or take us hostage. Don't believe me? What did they do with all the people from this country? Killed them, raped them, took them hostage. They do not have boundaries. Hamas do not have boundaries over what they will do to get what they want. So the assumption that a journalist could go into Gaza and somehow rise above all that, when the Israeli army knows exactly what's going on in Gaza, they know how difficult it's been for them to fight a war according to international law, trying to meet the humanitarian needs of the Gazan people, all of which they are doing. They know how difficult it is to face an enemy that, in spite of them doing that, decided to sabotage all their attempts to do that by placing rockets, booby traps in houses, homes, mosques, schools. What will they do with journalists? I mean, I don't think we're going to fare much better than the humanitarian aid workers, than the doctors, than anyone. So I think Israel made the decision that it's going to be bad for us not to let journalists in, but it's going to be worse for us if we do, because they are already losing the battle of PR or information, and they will lose it so much worse if they allow journalists to be abused in the same way that all those other things have. And they have let doctors in, and they have let humanitarian aid in. Those things, I agree, were more important than letting you or me in to report on it, though it would have been helpful in our work for us to see it with our own eyes. So I've come round to accept that that was the less bad solution.
So what is the victory vision of the information/advocacy war?
I think it's,
from the moment you said the word win about a while back, I began to feel itchy, because what is the victory vision?
Israel has continued to conduct this war, in my opinion, despite all of this stuff going on, despite the fact that I've been invited now in the last year to more public events where I've had to talk about genocide than I had in the rest of my life, when by the way, I'm the son of a survivor of a genocide. So that's weird to me, but despite all that stuff, Israel's just carried on going. It said, you know what, we're not committing a genocide, we're actually giving them aid, we're doing everything we can in a very hard situation, but let's carry on smashing the enemy, Hamas, let's carry on trying to liberate Gaza from Hamas, let's try and get rid of the threat to us. So in the end, they will lose the information war if you measure it as, did people go and march in Parliament Square against Israel? But who cares? I think that's, again, bad choice, worse choice. They thought, okay, we'll look bad for a while, and it's what you said about how much damage can you take. Like, if it ends up with arrest warrants in the ICC and the ICJ finding that Israel carried out a genocide, then that's probably a bit too much damage in the information war. But I think that Israel is used to some knocks, and the things that really matter are the things that Lee said, that I think it's busy getting rid of the actual threat in ways that we could not, a year and a half ago, have ever comprehended. Foreign armies are already coming to Israel to learn how to do, I know this from speaking to people in the military, they're already learning the new things Israel has pioneered and discovered in Gaza in the last 14 months, because they're going to need to do them too. And that's the point. Britain is still catching up on how to deal with terrorism domestically. Israel has made huge leaps and bounds in that because it had to. We will come to Israel to ask how they did it. And that is the winning of the information war, because that's the acknowledgement that actually you are right, even if it didn't feel right to us at the time. That's what I think.
Let me just answer your question, and I think, and then we can have a more, we'll hang around if people want. For me, the definition of winning the information war is very simple. Doesn't mean it's achievable, but the definition is very clear. It's when people see the Placard strategy for what it is, that none of these equations become legitimate. Anyone who tries to use these equations, Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals racism, colonialism, apartheid, that all of this becomes illegitimate. And I once described victory that when from the river to the sea will enjoy the same social legitimacy as Heil Hitler. That's for me, when it is driven to the margins of society, that's when you know we're in a good place. It doesn't disappear, but it languishes in the margins.
Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you Einat, and thank you to Nancy and Hanan again for hosting us.